I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Unbelievable.
And let me first say to the families, thank you for being here, and I apologize for your loss. I'd like to follow up on Representative Maloney's line of questioning about Haiti and Mr. Jacques. No one disputes that he had a legitimate court order for deportation, and that the Haitian government 3 times rejected accepting him back to their country. Are you aware that the U.S. has been the largest federal aid donor to Haiti since 1973?
No, sir, I don't follow that.
So we are the largest federal aid donor to history to Haiti. And are you frustrated that countries such as Haiti don't take back their citizens after they commit crimes in the United States and have a valid order for deportation?
Absolutely. If we can remove somebody and we have that order, we want to remove that person.
Would you support a law or amendment that says countries like Haiti should no longer get foreign aid or get a reduction in foreign aid if they do not accept their citizens back that have committed crimes in the United States?
I would support looking at that question, sir, and working with the Department of State to see if that's a reasonable and logical thing to do. Has
the government of Haiti apologized to ICE or to the victim, the family, at all?
I don't know about the family. I don't know.
They apologized to the U.S. government or ICE for their actions?
Not to ICE, at least that I'm aware of.
So I hope someone from the Haitian government watches this hearing, because now they've got bipartisan outrage about the government of Haiti. That's not a good place for the government of Haiti to be in. They could lose federal aid, and I would like to know if ICE, since you've already gotten a letter from U.S. senators looking into this, if perhaps you could communicate to either the Department of State or the government of Haiti and say that their behavior was unacceptable and we need them to change.
I'll certainly raise that subject again this afternoon.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the case of Sarah Root and how the person that killed her fled by posting bond. It is my belief that the bond system is in drastic need of reform in the United States. Only 2 major civilized countries have a major bail bond industry, a for-profit industry. It's the U.S. and the Philippines, the other one. Many other countries actually ban money bond, and that's because there is very little relationship between how much money someone can have posted or the cash on hand they happen to have and how dangerous they are. And in this case, it's a good example where someone posted money and then fled. It seems to me to make a lot more sense if we eliminated money bond and instead went to a risk assessment system, which is what the District of Columbia has done for many years. And basically they say, look, if you're at risk of fleeing or if you're dangerous, we're just not going to release you. But if you're not, and you're poor and you can't post the bail, we're going to release you. We're going to do it based on a risk assessment. And I think what happens often is these judges and the whole system tends to look at the money factor and say, oh, if they can post $50,000, we're just going to release them. And really, in real life, there's very little relationship between money and how dangerous the person is or whether they can flee. Often it just depends, can you get someone to post that 10% for the rest of the bond? And so I appreciate if you could look at how the bond system in the federal government may actually be helping to release people that are quite dangerous or at risk of fleeing. And maybe we should reverse that and look at a risk assessment system. I know this is not a partisan issue. The state of Kentucky is looking at moving towards a risk assessment system. And so could you look into that issue and let us know?
Well, actually, sir, it's supposed to be a risk assessment. I don't know the specifics.
But here's the problem. When you attach for-profit money to that system, it warps it so that judges, I think, don't do the proper risk assessment. I think judges would do a much better risk assessment if they thought, hey, it's on me now. It's not really how much money this person can post. It's my decision whether to release that, and it's totally on the judge and the factors. So if you could look at, would you at least look at that issue?
I certainly can.
Great, thank you. And with that, I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Grothman for his 5 minutes.
Right. You right now are supposed to fill an average number of beds
of 34,000 a day. Is that correct?
That's what we've been authorized for, yes, sir.
Right. And of those, are they filled now? About?
Excuse me?
Are they filled now? About?
We're about at 32,000, I think the last time I checked, average daily population, and right around that number in terms of like the last time I looked that day.
Yep. And of those 32,000, how many are people who've been found guilty of a crime, and how many are people who are maybe just for whatever reason grabbed at the border?
There would be some that are there because of having been charged with a crime, and others that are recent border entrants, some that came into the country after January 1st.
Right. And about how much of each?
I can get you those percentages.
Like about half-half, 80-20, 90-10?
I hate to pull something out of the air, sir, but I certainly can look at that.
Okay. So you have extra bed space available now?
About 200, if I'm right. And of course, that number varies from one day to the next because...
I thought you said you had about 32,000 in there and you're authorized for 34,000.
I'm sorry. Did I say 200?
Yeah.
Let me add an extra zero. I'm sorry, sir.
Okay. Right now, what percentage of criminals who could be deported you think are being deported?
Every criminal who has a final order of removal and a travel document is in the process of being removed.
Right, but there are criminals right now who are arrested for crimes who are not removed, correct?
Yes.
And do you know percentage-wise the number of people we could remove, what percentage are being removed?
Any given year? No, I don't, not right now.
Could you guess wildly, half, a third, 90%?
It's a portion of it. I would think it'd be, I don't want to guess, sir. I'll give you a proper percentage.
Okay. Could you tell us what type of crimes we don't remove people for now?
Oh, traffic tickets?
Drunk driving?
I'm sorry, that's not a crime, obviously. It's a civil matter.
Right.
It could be for minor offenses. Gosh, the list is long and depends on a state by state.
Well,
let me put it this way, where the offense has a possible sentence of less than a year probably, those are often misdemeanors.
and you wouldn't remove somebody for that?
It depends. Our priorities do allow us to move people with multiple misdemeanors. They're our priority. We just have to look at every case on a case-by-case basis and the facts relating to that case.
Do you have a data bank of all the people who have been convicted of a crime who are here illegally?
We have the criminal history on anybody we've touched who's in the removal process.
Okay, well, okay, it's kind of difficult. I'm going to ask the chairman to have another follow-up hearing so you can come back with more answers. But right now, if somebody is charged with 2 burglaries in the state of Wisconsin and convicted, are they going to be part of your database?
The offenses they're charged with?
Yes.
Yeah, probably so, because we'll be drawing the criminal history of each one of them.
Okay, so you have a data bank somewhere in which you are trying to keep track of all illegal immigrants here who are convicted of crimes?
Those that we know about.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Do you feel that there are a lot you don't know about?
Pardon?
Do you feel there are a lot you don't know about?
Well, I said there were about 2 million people in the process, and the guesses are that there are about 11.2 million here who we may or may not know about. So one could draw a conclusion from that there's 9 million or so who we don't know about, that are in the shadows.
But the question is, did they commit crimes? You feel they're...
About people I don't know, we don't know what, if we don't know who that person is here, we don't know what their criminal history is.
This is the question I'm going to try to get at. If an illegal immigrant commits 2 burglaries in this country, will you find out about it?
Yes, we may. It depends on how...
Every one of your questions, every one of your answers is not quite on point. Yes, we may. I mean, will you or won't you?
Sir, it depends on the local jurisdiction. I mean, if the local jurisdiction keeps records well and they input into the system that we are a part of, I can't give you an unequivocal answer. It's not a simple matter.
Can you give us any public policy reason why, say if somebody commits a burglary, why they should not be deported?
No. It depends on the cases and the facts relating to that case. If it's a burglary if the person's been here for 25 years, they have 3 U.S. citizen children, and the burglary was 24 years ago, looking at it on a case-by-case basis, we may make a decision not to remove them, but not to detain them.
I have no more time.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes a gentleman from Massachusetts, the ranking member on the National Security Subcommittee, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing. I want to associate myself with the remarks of the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, and also the written comments of the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney. And I want to express my condolences to the families as well. And thank you for turning your tragedy into something that may eventually help other families from the same tragedy that has befallen your family. So thank you for taking something very, very bad, something very painful, and trying to make something positive out of it. I appreciate your courage and your willingness to do that. I just want to make a couple of observations here. Ms. Saldana, you're aware of the Sadvitas versus Davis case, where the Supreme Court back in 2001 said that if you're holding a person that an illegal alien charged with a crime that has a deportation order, but there's no foreseeable opportunity for that person to be deported, you got to release them.
Painfully aware.
Yeah. So I'm just pointing back to Congress. We've got a responsibility here. You got to recognize the context in which all this is happening, and it is happening in the absence of a coherent and workable immigration policy. And I've had a chance with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to go down to Central America. We went down to Honduras, went down to Guatemala, went down to El Salvador, and like it or not, because of the executive orders that are out there, these human traffickers, they call them coyotes, but I think that's too romantic a term. These are human traffickers are capitalizing on that, and for $7,000, they'll give you 3 shots to get into the United States. And we visited some of the centers where if they get caught trying to cross the border, they get sent back. And
we're targeting those, Congressman.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to make a point here. Every one of those kids that was returned, and there were hundreds that got caught at the border and were returned because in Mexico they support that sometimes. Every one of those kids was picked up by their family within a couple of hours. So this is an organized attempt. It's not something that's just, people are desperate. They're economic refugees, and they're trying to have a better life. The point I'm trying to make is the last numbers we have for South and Central America, there are 61 million people living on less than $1 a day. They're desperate, extreme poverty, less than $1 a day. So if we have a system, if we're going to treat North and South America as a borderless region, then I think if we want an idea of what might happen, I think we look at Germany and we look at Europe. Because in that case, and I've spent a fair amount of time in Germany and in the Middle East and at refugee camps in the Middle East, we are asking for exact same problems where people are in desperate situations, and we do not have control of our border. We do not. And it is not the fault of customs, immigration and customs enforcement that we don't have control of our border. It's a problem of a willingness here in Congress to grapple with that problem. And we have a serious, serious problem. We can't have a Schengen zone here in the Western Hemisphere. We just can't sustain that. That's not a system that is going to provide for the safety of our citizens, and it's not going to be a system that will adequately address our need for legitimate and legal immigration. And I think it is, at one point you were pointing back at Congress and saying, that you've got a responsibility here too, and I think you are absolutely right, Ms. Saldana. Congress is responsible. We're responsible, and I think there's a solution out there, and I think we've got to just let cooler heads prevail, despite the vitriolic language we hear elsewhere about painting every single person south of the border with the same brush. That's not helpful. It's not right. But at the same token, we have a prime responsibility of protecting our people, and this is a national security issue. We've got to get control of our borders, north and south, and the faster we do that, the better opportunity we'll have to come up with a cogent and sustainable and responsible immigration system. So I thank you for your attendance here today. I see I've exceeded my time, and I thank the chairman for his indulgence. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Thank you. Thank him for his hard work on this issue and a number of other members of the committee. I was struck by the director's statement. In fact, she was looking directly at Congressman DeSantis, now the acting chair, when she talked about Republicans making this political. It's not about politics. It's about enforcing the law. It's about following.
I didn't say Republicans.
Well, your comments were obviously directed to Mr. DeSantis the entire time I was here. You were looking at Mr. DeSantis and following his opening statement and Mr. CHaffitz' opening statement, but that's fine. You didn't say Republican, so that's fine. You did say, I think, political bannering was the term you used. So I want to try to dissect these numbers. And again, from my perspective, following the law is not politics. It's the rule of law. It's what America is supposed to do and what America's supposed to be about. So let's look at some of these. It seems to me there are 4 categories of individuals that ICE probably interacts with. You have the most basic. You have people who are here on a visa and they overstay or they violate their visa. I think the law says if someone does that, they're supposed to head back to their native country as well. Then you have someone who's an illegal entrant. They didn't come here on a visa. They just illegally entered the country. If that comes to your attention, you have them. They're also supposed to be deported. It's my understanding of the way the law is supposed to work. And then you have the categories that we're talking about today, a subset of this bigger universe, if I'm getting this all right. You got people who overstay their visas or are here illegally, illegal entrant, who commit a crime. And they're in your custody. They're supposed to be deported. And then it seems to me you have maybe the most important category. Overstay their visas or illegal entrant who commit a violent crime and then are in your custody and are supposed to be deported. So we got 4 categories where the law says they're supposed to be deported, but we're really only focused on the last 2. Actually, even a smaller subset, illegal entrants who commit a crime who then you have in custody. And my understanding is you've released 86,000 of just that subset over the last few years. And over half of that 86,000 were released at your discretion, what's commonly called prosecutorial discretion. Is that accurate, Director?
That's correct.
That's all correct. So again, when you break it down, people came here illegally, did a crime, many cases violent crime, were in your custody. The law says they're supposed to be deported, and at your discretion, not because their country wouldn't take them back, you couldn't get travel documents, or notwithstanding other reasons, but over half of those 86,000 where you just decided you were just going to not follow the law, you were going to release them.
I disagree with that. We do follow the law. The law that Congress has provided says that for those other than those that are subject to mandatory detention, a bond decision must be made, and cite some of the factors that we consider, very much what you're familiar with in the penal system.
But the fact remains, you release them.
After a careful analysis of each case.
Careful analysis. My guess is the families who are here, I also want to express my condolences to, would disagree with your careful analysis.
Are we 100% accurate every time looking back, sir? As I said earlier, we strive for perfection, but we are human and we do fall short sometimes.
Half of the 86,000 were the way I described it. Is that accurate, Director? Over half.
I think so. I think that's right.
What are the other reasons? What are the other 40%, 45%, whatever it is.
Someone who's on their deathbed and is going to, you have something from a doctor says there's no purpose in putting this person in detention. They're going to die in a few months. Someone who is too ill to board a flight and they have to be transported by air. Someone who is pregnant. Those are some of the reasons.
Well, I'm struck by the four different categories. We're focused on the most, what I think American citizens would say, the most dangerous category, and the fact that over half of them are released just because you can do it.
You provided, Congress has said we can do it. We wouldn't do it if Congress hadn't provided that you consider bond for those that are not subject to mandatory detention.
But my understanding is you have the capability to hold more, and you're not doing that.
We do, but I'm telling you that we exercise our judgment, sir, based on what you have told us.
Well, you can't have it both ways. It can't be your judgment and you have the capability to hold more, and then you blame it on Congress.
I'm not blaming it on Congress. I'm telling you what the law. Well, that's what the law says, sir. If that's what you.
But then it can't be your judgment, and so you can't have it both.
No, you've given us that judgment. You've said there are things that are mandatory, and everything else.
And you have the capability to hold more people in that final category: illegal entrant, committed a violent crime, and they're in your custody. You have the capability, the facilities to hold more, and you're exercising your judgment to release them. And some of those people you release did violent crimes and actually took the life of American citizens.
Today, we have about 2,000 beds available, based on what you authorized, this Congress authorized for us to do.
Yeah, so I think we're saying let's use them.
Okay? And tomorrow it may be 34, it may be 36 tomorrow. That number fluctuates.
I'm over. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Connolly from Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Ms. Saldana, and my heart also goes out to the Hartling family and the Root family. I'm a dad with a daughter. I cannot imagine. And it was a failure of the system that made you victims and made your daughters victims. And we got a problem with immigration, and I think Director Saldana has been trying to point to that tome in front of her saying, I need your help in fixing that. Because there are problems in the current system that affect American citizens who count on it to protect them, but also immigrant families who want to make sure that they're treated with respect and dignity, because overwhelmingly most of them are not criminals. I want to enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, two pieces of correspondence. One is from the Southern Poverty Law Center about some of the problems with the Atlanta immigration raids, and another one from my part of the country, Northern Virginia, from the Arlington Public Schools, direction given by the superintendent of schools to all families and staff because of growing anxiety about these raids in Northern Virginia.
Without objection.
I thank the chair. Ms. Saldana, I entered those letters into the record, and one of those letters states that ICE, quote, trampled legal rights, subjected mothers and children to terrifying and unnecessary police encounters, and tore families apart. It also says these raids have turned to schools, including students on their way to schools. Are there indeed ICE raids on students on their way to schools?
No, there are not raids. We conduct operations, sir, and I've really worked very hard in the community. I've met with lots of organizations that simply do not understand what ICE does. And when the term raid is thrown around, it implies a thoughtless sweeping of people. The people we targeted in both these operations that occurred earlier this year, Operation Border Resolve, Operation Border Guardian, were specifically targeted to people whose status was determined to be illegal, who had had run their gamut of appeals and rights, and the process that's afforded them by the Immigration Naturalization Statute, who had a final order of removal and who were ready to be removed. That's not what I call a raid.
All right, you don't call that a raid. They do. And it's leading to superintendent of schools feeling he needs to provide counsel and reassurance to an entire school system based on the actions of ICE. Now, maybe that's justified, maybe it isn't, but maybe you want to talk to the superintendent of our schools in Northern Virginia.
I'm happy to. In fact, sir, if I can just brag a minute, we have set up a network. We're setting up a network of community relations officers, people who will meet with law enforcement, with school superintendents, with Rotary clubs, whoever will listen to us, so that we can lay out for them exactly how we go about our business. The taxpayer is entitled to know that,
Yep.
and that's why we want to do that.
Fair enough. But let me go back to a student. So a student on the way to school, Supreme Court's ruled that irrespective of status, if you're a student, you show up, you're entitled to a public education, correct?
I'm not sure. I take your word for it.
Well, it's a matter of case law.
Yes.
You were a
Whatever
U.S.
it is,
attorney. I mean, that was the Supreme Court ruling. I'm not making that up. And that's why local governments throughout America have to educate children irrespective of status. So whether they're documented or not is immaterial to a local public school. And is ICE targeting children based on their documentation on the way to what is a constitutionally protected education?
No, just adults. Unaccompanied children who have aged out are eligible.
Okay.
If they're over 17, I believe, or older. So no, we don't target children.
Okay. I've got a few seconds left. While you're doing your outreach, I urge you to do it with members of Congress as well. I can tell you in my district, probably my #1 subject now is immigration, given the demographics of my district. And we need a partner in your agency. We're not trying to make your life more difficult, but we are trying sometimes to solve through difficult problems that are family-related and confusion and all kinds of other things.
I'd like to follow up with you.
I would love to do that, because if we don't have your cooperation, we can't resolve some problems. And trying to make sure that from the top down, caseworkers cooperate with members of Congress as they're trying to do their jobs too, on behalf of their constituents, is always welcome. I wish I had more time. I thank the chair for the hearing, and again, my profound sympathies go with the families. There aren't words to describe how we feel.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I appreciate your service in a previous life, and I got to confess to you, I was surprised when you used the phrase political bannering in your opening. I was not only surprised, I was disappointed, because you seemed to direct that towards the Republicans. It was the Solicitor General of this administration not 2 weeks ago before the Supreme Court who talked about the damage wreaked by the separation of families. Of course, he wasn't talking about Sarah Root's family, and he wasn't talking about Joshua Wilkerson's family, and he wasn't talking about Casey Chadwick's family or Kate Steinley's family. He was talking about the families of people who are not here legally, and that just struck me as a political comment that he made. And of course, it's not us on our side that advocate for sanctuary cities, which is quintessentially a political analysis, that we're going to allow state and local officials to decline to follow federal process, but at the same time, we don't trust state and local cops enough to actually enforce immigration laws. That is a political calculus. That is not one done by folks on our side of the aisle. My friend from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, went to great lengths to quote from episodically from a single Republican. I've never heard him quote Secretary Castro, who has come before committees of this Congress and advocated for citizenship for all 12 million aspiring Americans. Like all 12 million can pass a background check. All 12 million, not a single one of them can't pass a background check. So if we're going to talk about political pandering, and if we're going to use your phrase, and you're the one who used it, I think we ought to at least acknowledge there's plenty of political pandering going on your side as well.
Let me make myself very clear. Very clear. I was not referring to one party or the other. I asked for everyone to drop the political banter and fighting and help me get a system that works.
All right.
I want the record to be clear on that.
The record's clear. Let's let the record be clear about one other thing, because I am vexed as to why Mr. Mejia was not detained. Can you tell me, as a former prosecutor, why the killer of Sarah Root was not detained?
An individual from ICE looked at the specific facts and circumstances related to that matter. This individual had no criminal convictions, previous criminal convictions, and made a determination based on his judgment that he did not need to be detained.
And
Can you and I disagree with that?
No. It's more than that you and I disagree with that. That individual was in fact wrong, because Mejia has failed to appear for court, has he not? Has he absconded?
It's very easy to look back, sir. Very easy to look back, and yes, he has.
Well, I'm looking back so we can look forward and prevent the next one. And that's about all we can do, unless we have a crystal ball, is look back and see what facts we were given him. Mr. Mejia, the only two things you look at in a bond analysis are danger to the community and flight risk. Those are the only two things you look at. So help me understand why someone driving 3 times the legal rate of impairment who is not here legally, did he have any criminal history at all, any arrest at all?
We did not find criminal history. I think I've been advised by Senator Ernst that he had some traffic violations previously. But criminal convictions, our records didn't indicate that he had.
Has he failed to appear subsequently for court appearances?
Subsequent to what?
Subsequent to his killing of Sarah Root.
Oh, no, he did not appear for his
right, so
court hearing.
he's failed to appear. That was my question.
Absolutely.
So the discretion exercised was wrong.
These are tough decisions, sir.
This one actually is not that tough to me, Director, with all due respect. It's not that tough.
Okay. Federal judges...
Would you have granted a $5,000 bond for that defendant?
I don't think the bond was set at $5,000.
No, it was $50,000, which means he had to post $5,000.
Yes.
Would you have set that?
I would not. If I were a judge of that state court, and I believe that was a judge of the state court system who made that decision. Another factor that the officer from ICE might have looked at in making his decision. I will tell you, judges make tough decisions every day, and we can point to judges. I was on the receiving end of many of these as a prosecutor, asking for bond, asking for detention, and a federal judge said no, and later that person absconded. Unfortunately, it irks me every time, of course. Unfortunately, it happens a lot.
Well, it does happen, and sometimes there are tragic consequences. I'm out of time, so I will close up with this. I believe in a previous life, I'm sure you work with state and local law enforcement in addition to federal law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And it's always struck me as unusual that we trust state and local law enforcement with the enforcement of every category of crime. I'm sure you had them on some task forces, whether it be narcotics, whether it be human trafficking. We trust them in child pornography cases. We trust them in all categories of cases, including traffic enforcement. So why don't we trust them in immigration cases?
Well, we do, actually. We have a 287G program that we enlist the help of local law enforcement in helping us with immigration enforcement. There are a number of jurisdictions, and I've asked our people to expand that program.
You've asked them to expand it because it seems like it's shrinking.
No, sir. It's not shrinking, other than maybe a jurisdiction withdrawing. That I can't control. We beg them to stay, but sometimes they withdraw based on whatever consideration.
So you do trust state and local law enforcement to enforce immigration laws, and you do not buy into the Democrat mantra that somehow racial profiling prevents them from being able to enforce that category of crime, but not any other category of crime?
Well, that's a fully loaded question, which I'd like to break down, because there is racial profiling, sir. I'm not saying that it happens every day, but there is. And so for me to agree with your general proposition would require me to agree with parts of it that I don't agree with.
Well, I'd like to have this conversation more because there would be racial profiling in narcotics cases, there's racial profiling in traffic stop cases, and that doesn't stop feds and state and locals from partnering. So I'm just trying to understand why immigration cases are different.
And I think I said they're not different. We have a...
You may have said it, but my Democrat colleagues have not. You may have.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes Delegate Norton for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'm less interested in the racial profiling than I am in the racial sensitivities raised by this issue. I want to thank you, Director Saldana, for being here. Like those who have spoken before me, I don't have the words to offer to parents who've lost their children, particularly when they consider that it could perhaps have been prevented. I have only the deepest condolences. I'd like to get beyond recrimination and into how you do law enforcement when the rhetoric is steeped with racial overtones. Look, I grew up in the District of Columbia. As a minority group, it was a deeply segregated city. I went to segregated schools. I couldn't go in public accommodations because I was black. And even the newspapers, the best newspapers, would say, John Jones, black, committed X crime in Northeast Washington. This had an effect on me and how I felt about criminals, to tell you the truth. Because John Jones, black, sorry, they didn't say that then. John Jones, Negro, I don't know whether he was guilty or not. All I know is that by pointing out his race, my community, a minority group in this city, felt that law enforcement was pointed at all of us. So I want to ask about the delicate task of law enforcement when those that are chiefly involved do happen to be from a minority group. For example, Donald Trump, when he announced he was running for president, said something that if I put black in where Mexicans are, I think people would know how I and others who are from minority groups felt. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, rapists. Now, I want to ask about the effect on law enforcement, where you have the delicate task of, in fact, going mostly after perhaps Mexican Americans, Central Americans who are coming into this country, and operating under the specter, not of racial profiling, but from the highest levels on television every day, hearing ethnicity called out in relation to your work. How does that affect law enforcement from the point of view of those charged with carrying out law enforcement that will, in fact, mostly involve the very people whose names have been called out? We're cheering from the grandstands. How does that affect law enforcement?
Well, we go about our business without regard to race. I will tell you this, though, Congresswoman. Immigration enforcement is a little different in the sense that the very definition of who we're after is determined by their country of origin, the fact that they're not from the United States and they're here illegally.
Their country of origin will be where people of color are chiefly located. I understand where they come from. But the point is that they have many relatives in this country, too. And somehow or the other, law enforcement has to handle the delicate task of, you heard talk about the raids, perfectly legitimate to do, and somehow making sure it is not caught in the rhetoric we hear. we heard also from Mr. Trump that we should I would close up our borders to people, and he named who he was talking about, in this case, not Mexicans, but Muslims. Besides, apart from the ignorance of that statement, is completely sealing our borders to any group possible, and is it an effective way to combat terrorism?
Well, that's a huge issue, but I would say no. That's why everything we do, starting with the Secretary and his priorities, is based on a case-by-case basis. You've got to look at every individual. It doesn't matter.
Well, how could you, so sealing the borders would involve what?
I can't imagine how you'd go about that. I think there have been some discussion about building a wall and that kind of thing. That doesn't sound like it would secure anything, actually, because I've seen the videos.
Well, could you issue something for people coming overseas, saying if you're a Muslim, don't travel to the United States, you will not be accepted?
We would not do that.
From the leadership, from the highest points of leadership, somebody has to make the American people understand the delicacy of this task. So while I think of the relatives of those who have been lost, my second thought are with those who have to carry out this difficult mission. Thank you very much.
Gentlewoman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Thank you for coming. I just echo some of my colleagues. I appreciate your service and what you're trying to do, but to dismiss what we're trying to get to the bottom of as political banter, that's not what we're doing. I mean, when we see reports where, and many of these releases were before you were even in ICE, but when we see 124 people who had been in custody and were here illegally and then end up getting charged with murder, when you see things like Kate Steinle, who was just going about her business, and then she got killed by somebody who had no business being in the country, that's something that concerns people here in the Congress, but the American people. And our government is involved in a lot of different things. The type of health insurance you have to buy, how much water a toilet can flush, all these different things. And yet a core function of the government is to ensure the safety and security of the American people. And it's frustrating when government is involved in all these other things and then fails at its core function. So we are absolutely serious about it, and it's not political theater. It's just a frustration to have families who have to go through this. Now, you said something earlier in your testimony. You said that you need a removal order to deport someone. Without that, they can't be deported. Is that correct?
A final order of removal.
Well, because aren't there administrative removals?
Yes.
They're stipulated removals?
Yes, absolutely.
And then there are expedited removals. Correct?
Yes, a person can volunteer to go back. A person who's caught at the border at ports of entry, we can move through that process a little quicker.
So there are ways to do it, and I think that part of the frustration is we've gone through the numbers a lot about the numbers that were discretionary versus what ICE would say because of the Supreme Court's precedent in the Zavidas case. But even there, that's a 6-month window. So you have somebody in custody, let's say, who got out of prison after committing a sexual assault against a child, and that individual is being held. You do have time to be able to repatriate that individual back to their home country. And what we're a lot of times told by DHS is, well, they don't get the paperwork to us in time, they don't do all this, and so then the 6 months elapse, and then this individual is released when they are clearly a danger to society. So you guys can work through this quicker. In some of these other countries, and I get that they're not always going to comply immediately, but we have not used any of our leverage against them. We have not done. The State Department has not suspended a single visa for any of these countries at all. We have the ability to do that. They depend on us more than we depend on their visas. And so what can you do to be able to move through the process quicker so that people who are clearly dangerous, have been convicted, don't have any legal right to be here, can be repatriated before that time limit expires?
I'm all about procedures and institutionalizing a process to make sure it works. My interest is not in second-guessing all our officers, it's in setting up a process and procedure that will get to that.
What do you need to do, though, to do that? What do we need to do? Because there's Mr. Gowdy, he has a legislative fix for this Zavidas issue. Is that something that you're familiar with?
I am not.
Would that be something you'd be open to learning about?
Absolutely, sir, and working with you on that total subject.
Because here's the, I guess, the issue, and you've raised the statute books and you've said, look, they're not mandated to be deported, even if they've been convicted of some of these bad crimes, because Congress has made these decisions. And while some of those crimes, it's true, may not be mandatory, that doesn't mean that the law does not provide you at least authority to detain them. In other words, just because it's not in that book does not mean that they have to be released. It does not follow that that's the case. Now, do you agree with that?
That is true.
Okay. And then in terms of the immigration courts, you've mentioned those. Just so that the American people understand, the immigration courts, they're not Article III courts, correct?
They're not.
They're
Article II.
They're Article II courts, correct?
Yes.
So
within the Department of Justice.
And so if an immigration judge orders somebody's got to be released and you feel that that's very strongly that that's bad for the safety of our country, you can then go to the executive branch and try to change that, correct?
Bureau of Immigration Appeals and then circuit courts after that.
Okay, great. Do you know when we first did this issue, in fiscal 13, there had been 36,000 individuals who had been released, who had been convicted of crimes but were here illegally. And as of last year, there had been 1,000 of those people who had already been convicted of new crimes. Do you guys have the figures on anybody from FY13 through FY15 who has been in ICE custody, previously been convicted of a crime, and then got released and then got convicted of a new crime?
I don't know about 15 precisely. We may have 15, but yes, we do have those numbers generally.
Okay, well, if you can provide those for us, I think that would be important. Then also back from 13, because I know that's obviously probably changed since the last time we have it. My time is up, and the chair now recognizes Mr. Heiss for 5 minutes.